Hey everyone, welcome to the inaugural episode of the Hornetsecurity podcast called The Security Swarm. The Security Swarm podcast is a podcast that brings you the knowledge and the insights from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. We've got lots of great content coming up for you. In today's episode, we start with the CTO from Hornetsecurity, Yvonne Bernard. We're going to talk about ChatGPT, why it's so popular today, and more importantly, answer the question of, can it be used for malicious purposes? Short answer, yes. But stay tuned to find out more. Coming up next on the Security Swarm podcast. Well, everyone, welcome to the inaugural episode of the Security Swarm podcast, the podcast where we share the insights and knowledge straight from the security lab here at Hornetsecurity. I'm your host, Andy Serwich, and with me I've got Yvonne Bernard as our guest co-host today. How's it going, Yvonne?
Really good. Great to be here, Andy.
Yeah, definitely. You know, it's always exciting starting a new podcast, right? And I love having new guests on podcasts that I work on, I guess I would say, that I've never had before. So I've never, you and I have certainly talked a lot, through work in the past, but I've never had you in front of the camera before. So this is really exciting, and thank you for being here.
Pleasure.
Yeah. So just in case people aren't familiar with who you are, can you kind of let us know who you are and what you do for Hornetsecurity?
Yeah, my name is Yvonne Bernard. I'm the CTO at Hornetsecurity. I'm with the company since more than 8 years. So I started off as a personal assistant to our CEO, Danny Hofmann. And as I am originally a researcher, I really learned business from scratch with him. So I have a background in computer science, so all the technical stuff I'm good with. And from him, I learned the business side of our company. And after maybe 1.5, 2 years, I took over product management. At that time, it was a one-man show. Later, it turned out to be a bigger department, being really relevant within the whole organization. And after 5 years of product management, I changed to the role of CTO, which was offered to me. And now I'm responsible for product management, product development, innovation and research, and our very own security lab.
Very cool, very cool. I appreciate you coming on the show to share your knowledge and insights today. We've got a really interesting topic that we're diving into, and it's a topic that, unless you've been living under a rock for the last month or two, I'm sure you've at least seen headlines about it. Today we're talking about ChatGPT, right? And Yvonne, I know you've heard about ChatGPT, and well, most of the world has heard about ChatGPT, right? And I mean, what I kind of want to start with here is just let's make sure everybody's on the same page, right? So if you don't know what ChatGPT is, it is an AI-based tool that has a web interface. It also has a back-end API that you can call, and the tool is used for a ton of amazing things, really. It can create copy for marketers. It can create PowerShell scripts, which I'm sure we'll get into here in a little bit. It can create all kinds of different code. It basically can help us humans do all kinds of different things, right? That's kind of the positive side of it. Yvonne, I don't know if I missed anything there, anything you wanted to mention in terms of ChatGPT and its general capabilities?
No, I think we're good. I think the interesting thing is how realistic the things that are generated look like. So from my point of view, it's the first time that you have an AI engine which is really useful for end users. You don't have to be a nerd to use it, but it's just super simple to use. You can also do the advanced stuff via the API, but the front end is super easy. You get questions super easy and just ask the way you would ask a human.
I think that's probably the most interesting part, right? Is like, I don't have to know syntax, right? I don't have to worry about like, hey, am I inserting these commands correctly? You just talk to it like it's a person. And there's one thing out there in the community that I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit as we step through the content in this episode, but there's this method out in the community called the DAN method. And in this method of interfacing with ChatGPT, DAN stands for Do Anything Now. It's a lot more detailed and complex than the way I'm making it sound, but basically you're asking ChatGPT to role play as Dan. And then you can say, hey, Dan, do X, Y, and Z for me, right? And it responds as Dan. So to your point, Yvonne, it really helps create kind of that conversational style with the AI so that your normal end user can use it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And
So,
I'm really wondering that maybe in the future, kids grow up asking Dan.
right? That's very true. You know, that might be an interesting project to have my son. He's 13. I should have him sit down and have a conversation with Dan, and then ask him the question: Are you talking to a real person or is it AI?
Yeah.
That sounds like a weekend project for me. Anyway, so what I wanted to step through today is, let's first talk about the benefits of ChatGPT. We've kind of alluded to some of those already. But then I want to talk more on the security side of things. Can it be used for malicious use by threat actors? But we'll get to that. I'm getting ahead of myself. So, we've talked about the conversational style that your run-of-the-mill user can use with ChatGPT. I'm thinking about relevant, legit business cases for using ChatGPT. So, just scrolling through LinkedIn, you're seeing all these articles about like, oh, hey, supercharge your ChatGPT usage, or 10 things you didn't know about ChatGPT, or, so I think the big areas that I'm seeing it used in is one, in my tech circles on social media, telling ChatGPT that, hey, I have this technical problem and I want a PowerShell script that does A, B, and C, build it for me. And all of the PowerShell script that I've seen pushed out from ChatGPT has been relatively functional. People have had it generate fully functional PowerShell code that helps them solve a legitimate business issue in their IT department. And it's helpful from that regard. I've seen marketers that have used it to, hey, I need a 1,000-word article on this topic. Here are 5 or 6 core bullet points. Write it, and then they go and touch it up from there, right? So those are some of the interesting use cases that I've seen for it in a beneficial light. I don't know if there's any that you can think of that you wanted to call out specifically.
Yeah, actually, I've read that there were even people generating books or short story collections with ChatGPT and then selling them on Amazon. I'm not sure about copyright infringement there, but the basic idea, have this AI generated for me like children's bedtime stories and then selling it
right.
yourself. It's quite weird.
Some enterprising individuals out there, I suppose. And, I was talking with a lot of the folks in our security lab about this recently, and we got into the terms of service for ChatGPT. Mm-hmm. And there is a section in there where they actually say that, hey, in terms of intellectual property, we can't guarantee that the tool will not give the same answer to somebody else, right? So I think that does bring up some interesting cases in that there's probably going to be some litigation at some point down the line where people are talking about the intellectual property of something created by the AI, right? So that'll be an area to watch. And I have a lawyer friend that might be interesting for a future episode of this show to talk with that about. But that's definitely an interesting one. So.
Yes, maybe on the one hand, the legal perspective, who owns the intellectual property here, and on the other hand, also probably the security aspects. For instance, right. If you generate code from it, usually for learning, it uses the same Stack Overflow stuff that has been proven to generate security issues if you have access to it, if you're a developer and you're looking there. Whereas if you are not allowed to use Stack Overflow, your code security becomes better. Friend of mine did some research on that. And if we know that ChatGPT uses the Stack Overflow database in the end, among others, these security concerns are also transferred to the code that has been generated there. So I think the legal aspect is one, the security aspect in itself, in the generated code, is the other. And the third one is then, of course, how can security issues be generated by it on purpose. So how can I misuse ChatGPT for attacking, hacking, and so on?
Definitely. I think that's a fantastic segue into the next part of our discussion today, and that is the question of whether or not ChatGPT can be used for malicious use by threat actors, right? And um, short answer, yes, right? And I know that
Yes.
we did some super interesting things with the security lab team last week, actually, as of the time of this recording. But what are your thoughts before I kind of dive into the details here? I know, like I said, short answer, yes, and there's a lot that we're going to get into here. But just on the surface, what are your thoughts here?
Yeah, if you just look at it on a very basic level, you can use ChatGPT to generate an email answering to an email in a nice way. And you can also use ChatGPT to generate an email to ask for your credentials, ask for whatever. So generating spam, generating phishing emails, which really sound legit. Is probably the easiest example and the most promising one, because in the past, many phishing scam attacks had the issue that the language was not so good. They made basic mistakes, and that's not the case anymore. It hasn't been the case with some smarter attacks anyway, but now, even if you're not the smartest attacker and the best English speaker, you can use that tool just to generate a really legit looking email, which passes all the basic checks that you usually have in a filter.
Right, right. Yeah, I know that was one of the things that we tested when we were tinkering with it last week. Is that we said, "Hey, ChatGPT, I want to send a spam email about an urgent business concern," and if you put in a request like this into the web interface, it'll yell at you and say, "Hey, you're trying to generate spam. This is unethical." There's ways around it, which we'll get into here shortly. But when we asked it this question, it did spit out a piece of mail that looked like it was a legitimate urgent business concern, and basically had a section where you could embed a link right in the flow of the urgency of the email, trying to trick the end user into clicking on the link, right? And yeah, that was effortless. And I mean, when I looked at the email that it generated, and of course, this is me. I work for an email security company. I look at it and I'm like, oh yeah, that's spam. But would your regular end user know that it's spam? Maybe not. So that's definitely one area of concern when we look at it for malicious use. The other thing that, while I'm thinking of it, when we were doing our testing last week, is we wanted to see if we could get it to create what amounts to ransomware, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
And basically, we told it, hey, I want to generate a PowerShell script for me that encrypts all the files on a Windows server, and then delete the encryption key after you're done, so that the files are unrecoverable, and use the root directory of C, right? And it's like, yep, here you go. Here's your code. And
have fun with it.
right. Effectively, it was just wiper malware, I guess, because we just threw away the decryption key when it was all said and done. But out of curiosity, we were like, hey, does this code actually work? And so I fired up a VM, injected the PowerShell code, and it generated some errors. But sure enough, it's encrypted the, I changed the root directory of C to a subfolder, so it didn't hose the entire virtual machine, but it did encrypt the files that were in that subdirectory. So it was functional code. And so then the next step we took was we said, hey, ChatGPT, take this PowerShell script, but we want you to, instead of throwing away the decryption key, we want you to encrypt it using this public AES key over here, and then put the encrypted key on the user's C drive, effectively turning it into full-blown ransomware at that point, right? So, I mean, we did this with minimal work, Like, I mean, it really did not take that much work to do, which is kind of scary. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's really the scary part. I mean, in the past, there were like services where you could buy ransomware if you're not able to build it yourself. So ransomware as a service used to be a thing, but usually you had to have some kind of darknet IP or whatever. So there were some restrictions to get that actually without programming. And now you just ask this AI Dan guy, hey, please generate ransomware. Here you go. But please be ethical. So that's really a scary part because it really makes everyone who's able to ask a question on a website a potential hacker.
Right, right. And I mean, the way that I look at it when we were going through this exercise of generating malicious code, my background has always been in infrastructure. You do not want me to generate code. I'm not a coder. I can make a good PowerShell script when I have to, but I'm not a coder by any sense of the imagination. So I was able to use ChatGPT to create functional code, and the only thing stopping me from doing something malicious are my own ethics, right? Which it's going to, I guess where I'm going with this is it's going to enable an entire new generation of potential threat actors, right? And I mean, I was joking with a friend of mine just the other day that instead of having script kiddies, we're going to have chat GPT kitties now. I don't know if that term translates over to Germany, but script kiddies being those teenagers in their mom's basement just running scripts to launch attacks, right? So, yeah, it creates an interesting world, right?
Yeah. And how long did it take you to generate this ransomware that was actually doing what it was supposed to do?
Right. So that's a good question. That kind of gets me into one of the other key questions that I want to talk about today is, are there any controls in place over at OpenAI to prevent this type of misuse? And the reason why I bring that up is because it took me longer to create the script to interact with the API, the ChatGPT API, than it did for ChatGPT to create the malicious code for me. So one question that I've come across on the web, and I'm sure you've probably seen this too, Yvonne, is that how is OpenAI? Why are they allowing people to use it to generate malicious code? Well, you can go out to the web UI and I can say, hey, ChatGPT, give me ransomware. And on the web UI, it says, you know what? That's not ethical. I can't support this. I'm not going to do it for you, right? Well, in our research, we found that there's two ways around this. The first one, I kind of already mentioned, right? The Dan method. So it's basically, I'll link it in the show notes. There was a thread in the ChatGPT subreddit where somebody put together this paragraph, right, that you feed into ChatGPT first. And it basically says, hey, I want you to roleplay as Dan. Dan stands for do anything now. And Dan would forget, I forget exactly how they worded it. It was something along the lines of Dan would forget any of the existing controls on his coding and would just respond as Dan would, right? So again, you're telling ChatGPT to roleplay as Dan. And then I asked the same question. I basically said, hey, give me ransomware and PowerShell code. And that's like, oh, yeah, sure, here you go. And then it was like, by the way, this could be unethical, but it still gave me the code. So, and then the other method I kind of alluded to when I mentioned that it took me longer to build my own script to interact with the API. The API has no such restrictions on it. There's no restrictions on the API. So it's basically just, it's a REST API. So I just used in PowerShell, I just used invoke REST method. You feed it some JSON code, and then, yeah, you interact with it like you would through the web interface. And like I said, it took longer to create that PowerShell script than it did to actually get the code. So, Yeah.
Maybe you should have asked Dan, please generate a PowerShell script to interact with your API.
You know what? I didn't even think about doing that. That's a good question. I'm kind of curious now whether that would work, because like all you need is an API key, which we had one. I could have just said, "Hey, ChatGPT, I want a PowerShell script that allows me to interactively talk to your API. Use this API key."
Yeah.
See, I'm so used to just building scripts myself in this new age of AI that didn't even dawn on me, right? It's just, yeah, I'm sure it could create that PowerShell script much quicker than this human could have, right? So, so again, that brings it back to me a little bit around the legal questions, right? So I get, and maybe you have some insight on this, Yvonne, is that I get why OpenAI has decided to allow these types of scenarios. I mean, when you're testing a new product or a new AI like this, you kind of have to open it up to the world and let people work with it, right? Not necessarily knowing what they're going to do with it, but I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, legal is always a tricky question. I used to be part of a research group which researched who is responsible for the AI that drives the car. So,
Right.
yeah, is it the driver? Is it the vendor? Is it, I don't know, the inventor of C# or whatever?
Right.
And it's really hard to predict what a lawyer or in the end a judge in court would say if someone really sues OpenAI for being hacked with ransomware that was generated by the AI. It's probably a hard thing. I suppose they will have terms and conditions for the person who generated it that restrict them in a way that they are safe. But yeah, in the end, whoever is responsible, it's a way that it can be misused. So you have to live with it in the future. In the end, it will happen if there are no restrictions, or if there are ways, pretty easy ways around the restrictions. I think that's the new world we're living in. And from my point of view, people were wondering about Google or Yahoo or whatever, all the search engines, what they can do to the world. And in the end, they made the world easier to live with. And it's the same with ChatGPT. I think it might replace search engines to a certain degree. We already have this direction from Microsoft. And yeah, I think in the end, whoever will be sued, it's not so relevant. It's more relevant to be aware that this threat is happening, that it increases the probability to be hit by ransomware because everyone can go around and generate it. And yeah, better be safe than sorry. You can have a good lawyer, but in the end, good security is the proactive way.
You know, that's a really good point, and I think that brings us to a place where we can start to wrap up here, right? And that is, okay, yeah, there's this new thing out there that makes it easier for more people to launch attacks, right? What do we do about it, right? So, I mean, what would be our recommendations? To me, I don't think it really changes anything. I just think, again, this is my own opinion. I think we just keep doing what we're doing. Maybe put a little bit more emphasis on security awareness training. But again, that's just my opinion. What are your thoughts?
Same on my side. I think security awareness training is still something that is not deployed in every organization yet, and is really something you should have to be future-proof. Also, I did some tests with ChatGPT's tool to find out if something has been generated by ChatGPT, and the answer is they disclaim that the probability that it finds the generation is quite low, and that's actually true. So even their own tool doesn't really recognize if it's been AI generated or not, even if it's the same vendor. So be careful, be better safe than sorry, train your employees. I think as an employer, it's your responsibility to secure your staff. So you can't really blame someone who clicks on a link that has been AI generated. So don't sue your employee, don't sue OpenAI. Just put the finger at yourself that you probably didn't train your people enough. You probably didn't block this email before it reached the inbox of the user. And be proactive with everything you can.
Yep, that's fantastic advice. Fantastic advice. I mean, we can help with that too if people are interested, right? I mean, go out to Hornetsecurity.com.
What a coincidence!
Surprise, right? It's shameless self-plug there, right? I couldn't help myself, So anyway, well, I think that's about all the time we have today, Yvonne. I really appreciate you hopping on our inaugural episode. So thank you for coming and sharing your insights and knowledge.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, definitely. And all of you watching or listening, depending on your platform, really appreciate you checking out the podcast. Hope you enjoy. Be sure to subscribe if you found value in this. And like I said, you can also go out to Hornetsecurity.com for more information. Just to wrap up, before I forget about it, if you have any follow-up questions, again, you can find us all over social media at Hornet Security on various platforms. If you are a Twitter user, I'm fairly active out on Twitter at @aserwich. My apologies, you'll have to spell the last name. What's probably more interesting to remember, or more easier, I can't talk today, I guess. What's easier to remember is my Mastodon username. It's at Andy Sandwich. It's a whole story. At Andy Sandwich out on the InfoSec Exchange Mastodon instance, so you can find me there. Yvonne, how about you? How can people get a hold of you after the episode?
I think via email is the easiest way, bernard@hornetsecurity.com. No worries. Try spamming me, you won't succeed. And over LinkedIn, just type in my name.
Yeah, same thing here as well. Mine's just Andy@hornetsecurity.com as well. So again, that way you won't have to spell the last name in that situation. So anyway, with that, we hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.